All right, welcome back to Unilateral Everything. This is episode 15. I'm here in the Lit Tower Strength Training headquarters, aka my mom's basement, because I have a cool whiteboard and this will keep me on track a little bit more than just driving in the car. So yeah, 15. Finish off all the maxes, all of the process of going through 8 weeks of no squatting on bilaterally, so doing everything on a single leg. So just going over an overview, kind of what we learned from that and what implications we can get out of that. But the first thing we got to realize when we're looking at the whole program, the lens that we look through is the sport of weightlifting. Primarily just because that's what I do and that's what I focus on, and so that's where we used the sport that we used. And then a lot of times it's because weightlifters aren't seen doing a lot of unilateral work. Squatting is very popular as the main method of leg strength building. So to be able to see what we can do with just unilateral work, lunges, rear foot elevated split squat or Bulgarian split squats, regular split squats, front foot elevated split squats. All these different things, and just kind of seeing how that translated to weightlifting performance was kind of the whole purpose. But for me as a coach, it's something I always try to do is I'll never ask an athlete to do something I won't myself. And so being able to have an understanding of how unilateral exercises affect the body and how they kind of, what roles they may play in sport. So that's kind of where we were at with that whole program. And a big part of the why, obviously I went through a bunch of physical injuries myself and understanding what happened with that. Applications for weightlifting. Like I said, you don't hear a lot of weightlifters talking about single leg work, single leg pulling, single leg squatting, upper body single arm stuff. It plays a role into variety. I think something I found is that it wasn't super monotonous. So having the variety of being able to do a Bulgarian split squat, of being able to do a reverse lunge. And I didn't even tap into that many different variations, but the amount of variety that's out there is a good thing, because I think sometimes you can get caught under the mental drag of getting under heavy load. Obviously as a weightlifter you need to move heavy loads because that's what you're training for, but being able to understand that there's a lot of options out there. You can feasibly squat every single day, and you can have your heavy days bilaterally, but being able to unilaterally do some things to, one, prevent injury. Well, I guess one was have variety, but two, also prevent injury. A lot of times weightlifters are moving in a vertical plane. It's up and down. I won't get into the transverse, sagittal, all that stuff. There's a lot of up and down. There's not a whole lot of forward, backward, or lateral movement in weightlifting. So being able to approach some things for injury prevention would really, really help out using that unilateral work. And especially with barbell work like that, you can load up barbells pretty heavy for some unilateral work. And that's something that can still play into a good benefit, which is great because the one thing I noticed is that velocity, like total weights didn't go up, but velocities that happened at those weights, the quality of muscle contraction you can get from varying up those movements may help out a good bit. But the really good thing is learning the applications that you can apply these to athletes. Like I said, my job is to understand what I'm giving athletes. I won't give them anything I won't do myself. So things that you can look at for those athletes, there's something called the bilateral deficit. I talked about it in a couple episodes back, that I was asked the question, could I do 50% of my front squat in that Bulgarian split squat position? And the answer that I had to give was no. And based off of kind of broad observation from tons of coaches, is roughly you should be able to do about 60% of your max for at least one on that Bulgarian split squat, or a reverse lunge, stuff like that. be able to do 50 to 60% on one leg that you could do bilaterally or on two legs. So having that ability, we have to look at the sport mechanics and understand this bilateral deficit, because almost every sport doesn't happen on 2 feet. Whether you're running, whether you're changing direction, landing, jumping, it's very rare that we are constantly on 2 feet. So being able to train unilaterally allows us to develop strength in those movement planes, and also in the same way that we kind of have sport movements. Not necessarily that we're going to mimic a movement from the sport, but if sport happens on one leg, we need to be prepared on one leg. So looking at that, this is actually the one thing that I started to realize, because I've toyed around with already with some of these concepts with the athletes I train. From a technical standpoint, squatting tends to be a very technical movement for some people, and from an overall adaptability standpoint of teaching some of these unilateral moves, especially split squats, lunges, things like that, they're actually fairly simple to teach, and especially when learning them with body weight and then progressing to a bar, I find that most people have the ability to do these first and do them correctly first, and then gain the ability to squat. That's just my own findings and just kind of my own observations with the athletes I work with. But most kids, especially the ones that I work with, they would not have a very good squat, but I can have them split squat with a bar, and they can actually load up fairly well with those movements, because they don't have, one, as much fear, but also just because it's a little bit easier to teach, a little bit easier for them to grasp. So that's a good little point to think about, especially when you're looking at younger kids, middle school, high school level. A lot of them spend most of their time sitting down. It's pretty common to see a lack of ankle mobility and hip mobility in these athletes. And so being able to understand that we can have them load up in weight on some of these movements, and probably very safely. Like I said, this is just kind of my observations as I've implemented these things with my athletes already. That you can do these things fairly safely from a technical standpoint. They're not very technical lifts. So those are some of the applications we have for athletes. If you go back in other episodes, there's obviously tons of different stuff that I covered, and it was about my own training. But these are things that what we really are looking at from doing this whole process of not squatting. So remembering that we used it for weightlifting, yes, is very important, because we haven't, or I haven't, used this extensively yet with my athletes. And there's a lot of people out there. I think Mike Boyle is probably the one that comes to mind when people think about only doing stuff on one leg. And that's kind of where I was introduced to unilateral training and bilateral deficits.
There you go.
Knowing that we used it for weightlifting, there is ways to apply it to weightlifting, and especially for long-term injury prevention and long-term sustainability, definitely think it's something that's very, very useful. But then understanding this from a general sport
Catch
perspective,
yourself. Catch yourself. It's not
and
about going
knowing
through fast.
that most people can do very close, they can load up very closely to their actual 1 rep max bilaterally
there it is.
on each leg. So being able to have
4
that
times on each leg.
taken into factor, as well as knowing that most sports happen on 1 leg at a time, then you can also be able to program for that, knowing that that's something you need to plan for. Then obviously the technical side of things, being able to understand what those kids are going through, and that learning weight training movements can be pretty tricky, especially now with kids specifying in sport at a really early age. They don't have as great a grasp on their mobility and their physical ability and getting into different body positions. So being able to teach these, they're fairly non-technical, so it's pretty easy to tell somebody, hey, you know, spread your feet out, drop your knee down 90 degrees, 90 degrees. Most kids are going to get that. Same thing, hey, take a step back to where this leg's at 90 degrees and this leg's at 90 degrees. It doesn't even have to, you don't have to use technical terms like 90 degrees. It's fairly simple to learn. So that's something to be able to think about going forward with that. So that's kind of the closing thoughts on unilateral everything. Being able to kind of break down, not necessarily the week by week, but just the whole thought process over the long term and how it can apply. So that's kind of what I took from it. I know there's a lot of differing opinions about, especially when it comes to the weightlifting applications, single leg training, single arm training, but just to be able to have that grasp of injury prevention and some variation helps out a little bit. And then understanding those applications for athletes are really important. If you've actually watched all these episodes, thank you, because this has just also been me trying to figure out YouTube. So, but it's been a really fun process for me trying to get into kind of doing something consistent and making some kind of video consistently and learning how to use video editing software and stuff like that. So appreciate you guys tagging along. I'm looking forward to doing more stuff, especially here at the whiteboard, because I realize I have a whiteboard that is 6 feet long. So being able to do stuff here to kind of map some things out. So thanks for joining along. I'll kind of update in the next project. I'll actually probably put this program either on Train Heroic or be able to put it on the Tower Strength Training and be able to get some access codes or be able to have even a free download possibly, just so you can try out the program yourself and see what you think of it. So until then, until the next video and the next random thing I come up with, we'll see you guys next time.